that with a form, you have a form, you have a method, which is either get or post. You have an action, which is a URL of a script. You have some widgets. And you have a submit button. We talked about the submit button and we talked about the form. I guess one thing I didn't talk about the submit button that is very annoying and that most of you have probably experienced yourselves. Does anyone know how forms also get submitted other than with hitting an OK button or a submit button? Very often, if you're not careful, tab. For some reason, most browsers map the tab key to submit, which is very annoying because what is the other way we think of using tab as? Pardon? The next thing. So it turns out that often when you are putting together a form, if you want to use tab to take you to the next form object, you may have to do something in order to force that, okay? Because tab otherwise may end up submitting your form. Depends on the browser. But right now, we want to talk about widgets, okay? And there are various types. There are, the originals were radio buttons, checkboxes, menus, so-called number widgets, and type-in text boxes. Since then, there have been a proliferation of things so that you now, with HTML5, have things like calendar, email, phone, URL, color, and a whole lot of other input choice. Range, which is a slider effectively. And you need to know when to use them because computer science majors have a distressing tendency to use type-in text boxes when they're inappropriate. So a guiding principle of human-computer interaction is that you try to avoid allowing the user to make a mistake. Which means that, for example, with dates, it's very easy for people to mess up dates. If you're in Europe, you want to enter dates one way using day, day, month, month, year, year. If you're in the States, you want to do it as month, day, year. With telephone numbers, it's easy to mess up. So you want to prevent users from making mistakes. So as much as possible, you don't want to use text boxes. That's why in HTML5, they came up with things like the calendar selector, which I'll show you in a moment. But we'll start with ones you should be familiar with. Radio buttons, checkboxes, menus, the number widget, and typed-in text boxes. When do you use each of them? That's the key, and that's not something in the book. You use radio buttons and checkboxes when you have 5 to 7 items to be selected from a set. You use a menu when you have greater than 7 items from a set. Why is that? It has to do with working memory. So your working memory is like RAM on a computer. It's what you can instantaneously access. For an adult, it's 7 plus or minus 2 items. Okay, everything else goes into your long-term memory, which is like secondary storage. It's slower to retrieve it. Okay, and I'm going to ask all of you to put away your cell phones. It annoys me to see cell phones. Okay, it's distracting, so please put them away. Okay, thank you. So adult working memory, 7 plus or minus 2. If you lay out something in a or radio buttons or check boxes and there's 5 to 7 items, they can be, in effect, instantaneously loaded into working memory. So if I drop down this, that's too many items. And you are reduced to a linear scan. If I drop down all these menus, there we go. This one, you can instantaneously put all of them in working memory, and with just a glance, you can figure out what item you need. If it's more than 7 items, what cognitive psychologists have found is people start scanning because they can't load everything by just a glance. Now, you see separators here, right? What do separators do? They kind of group things into groups that are 5 or 7 items. So what happens is if you kind of know where on the menu to find something, your eye can go to that spot, and then with that grouping, you might be able to get everything into memory with one glance. But that's why radio buttons and checkboxes, you use them with 5 to 7 items, because with radio buttons and checkboxes, everything shows up on the screen, and screen real estate is valuable. With a menu, typically only the name of the menu shows up. When you click on it, then the other items on the menu show up. So with a menu, it's different. You see only the name of the menu, then when you click on it, it drops down or pops up a list of everything. So you use a menu when you have to select more than 7 items. Okay? Then a number widget you use for things in a range, like 0 to 100. Okay, those are those little increment and decrement boxes you saw when I was demoing the assessment website that you're going to be doing. And it was 0 to 100. You can enter the number, but it won't let you enter something outside the range. Okay? In fact, I can show you a number widget. Let's fire up MAMP. Open the website, my website. Select that. Go to password. Go to results. So if I try to enter something like 370, notice it's highlighted in blue. Now notice, it's hard to tell, but well, in this case, it's not showing in red. Normally it shows in red. Oh, wait, that's because it's not restricted to be between 0 and 100. It can be anything. Let me go to plan. The weight has to be between 0 or 1 and 100. If I enter -5 and I try to hit save, it says, please select a value that is no less than 1. And that's because I have a range on it. I have a min and a max attribute that says min is equal to 1, max is equal to 100. So while it didn't initially show an error value, when I tried to submit it, it popped up an error message. So it stops the user from entering something that is incorrect. Okay, now it worked. So this is a number widget. You use it for a range. You do the same thing with a slider. Okay, now there are certain things that you cannot enter with a slider. Okay, if you think about it, would you try to enter a zip code with a slider? No, why not? What's the problem? Yes, Emily?
Well, I think that part of the good thing about sliders is how easy they compress the arrows and like go up and down. And with a zip code, you don't want to do that. You just want to enter one number. It
Right.
like trying to enter a telephone number with a slider.
So, right, but okay, let's say there was only 5 zip codes. Would you then think a slider might be better?
Sliders are mostly for range queries, whereas
Very good.
Isn't a zip code more of a right term point query? I think it's
Yes, so a zip code is more like a point query. Very good. So that's one thing, although even with a zip code, you could kind of get close. Okay, let's then do something different. Let's say we wanted to enter a number between 0 and 3,000. That's still maybe in a range. But you might not want to. Why might you use a slider, say, for an age, which is 0 to 100, but not something for the age of a tree, which is 0 to 3,000? Yes, why?
Because user input means you're sliding with a mouse.
Right. Okay, but there's still, you can get very fast. Believe me, if I can get 0 to 3,000 up on the screen, you can get very quickly to 2,000 if you need to.
It's like a small movement in the mouse.
The small movement in the mouse is going to cause a big variation, right? So the problem is the number of pixels on the screen. Sliders work well when you can devote several pixels to each value, because then you're not subject to jitter. It doesn't work well when you can only, say, get 1 pixel per value, or even less, because then any motion of your hand and you're off the right value. So sliders work well so down here with range, they work well when you can get several pixels per value. So that's more nebulous because it depends on the size of the screen. A mobile device has fewer pixels than a laptop, so I can't really give you a precise number, but generally you prefer sliders to text boxes when you can get several pixels per value. Why do you prefer them to type in text boxes? Because they force a number to be selected in the proper range. With a type-in text box, they might enter a non-number. They might enter something outside the range. So if at all possible, you want to use a numeric box if you can. Now that's not possible with a zip code. There's about 100,000 zip codes. Now you could still get that down. Let's say that you knew it was in Knox County. If you knew that you were selecting a zip code from Knox County, what do you think you would use? A type-in text box? Very good, a drop-down menu. Because there's probably more than 5 to 7 zip codes in Knox County, but it's a limited number that you could use with a menu. So if you could limit the number of zip codes to Knox County, you'd probably use a drop-down menu. Okay, so in a menu, they typically are greater than 7 items, and this is again a rough figure, but generally less than 100 items. I know that's approximate, so don't take it as gospel, but generally if you can get it down to less than 100 items, you'll use a menu. This will be on a test. I guarantee you that I will give you choices on a test, situations, and ask you for the right widget. So you better have this in your notes, what is each. So I guarantee you I will ask a question like that on the final. I will say, for example, you have narrowed down the person's county to Knox County. What is the best widget to use for selecting the items? And I'll have things like type in text box, drop down menu, radio buttons, check boxes, and the answer would be drop down menu because it's going to be between 7 and 100 most likely. Okay, check boxes are for multiple choices, radio buttons are for single choices. So if you're going to be giving toppings on a pizza where multiple choices are allowed, you would use check boxes. If they're mutually exclusive, you use radio buttons. So radio buttons are for mutually exclusive. Check boxes, multiple allowed, multiple items allowed. Okay. So we now go to a couple of things that the book pointed out, and I will do it too. Nope. Nope. What was it? Ah. Nope. Okay, just a second. It's somewhere. Probably play. Nope. Don't have a 2000 there. Forms.html. It should be there. There we go. Okay. So I have a couple things. First of all, if you're forced to use text, you can specify a regular expression. I know we haven't gone through regular expressions yet, so don't get too bent out of shape. But what this is saying is I want a text thing where I can have a character that is A, B, or C, and a number that is between 0 and 9. Okay, here I have a type equals date. Here I have a type equals telephone, and here I have a type equals email. So let's display them. I'm using Firefox. So here is my A, B, and C. So I'm going to enter Brad, and notice it went red because that's not fitting the pattern. Now I will try capital B9. It's happy because that fits the pattern. I'll try capital D6. It's not happy. It doesn't make the pattern. So one very nice thing you can do is specify patterns that you expect the input to match. Here, this is a date one. Notice that Firefox actually pops up a nice little calendar for me. And I can enter a date, and it's already in proper format. Okay, with email addresses, I entered BVZ. It doesn't like it because, does anyone know why? It's an email typed in text box. What's it missing? An @ sign. Okay, still unhappy because there has to be something after the @ sign. Okay, now it's happy. But if I stop after a period, it's not happy because it knows that something has to follow a period. Here is a telephone one. It expects it in this thing, it seems. Why did it work? It doesn't seem to be type checking a phone number. And the reason is phone numbers don't have a uniform pattern worldwide. So it turns out you can declare something as a phone number, but it won't be type checked. URLs will be, email addresses will be, dates, because those are all things that Depending on the country, the browser has a good chance of getting right. Phone numbers are just so crazy, you'd probably have to give a pattern. So I believe, let me give it a try. I could give it a pattern. So I'm going to say pattern equals, and I want a left parentheses, then I want 3 digits, then I want a right parentheses, then I want a space, then I want 3 digits. Don't worry if you don't know what I'm doing. 4 digits. Let's see if that will check it or not. So now it did, so we'll do 865, 412. Okay, whoops, it does not like that. No, I have parentheses. See, I have a parenthesis. Oh, I need a backslash in front of those parentheses. Or otherwise it is capturing them. Let's try it again. Yep, now it likes it. Now we take away the 7, it doesn't like it. So in fact, even with a telephone one, I can give it a pattern and force the input to conform to that pattern. So we're going to find out regular expressions are your friend. You remember how much you hate type checking and error checking? Regular expressions do it for you. So regular expressions will be your friend. We haven't gotten to them yet. You also need to be aware that different browsers are implementing these HTML5 things differently. Last year when I showed date on Firefox, it didn't work. But now they've made it work. Yes? Yes. So while we haven't gotten into regular expressions yet, I could put all of that into a actual parentheses. And then I could have done a pipe character or, and then I could do another pattern, and then it would be that pattern or the other pattern. So yes, the answer is there is a way to do an or. Other questions? Okay, so try to avoid, the moral of the story is avoid type in text boxes at all costs. If you have to use text boxes, then try to at least provide the pattern that you're expecting. Now, you can't always do that. If someone's entering a last name, there's no way around it. But if someone's entering a zip code, you can force them to enter 5 digits. If they're entering a social security number, you can force them to enter it in the way you want them to enter it, okay? So try at least using a pattern if you have to use a type in text box. But if you have things like date or color or email, use the built-in types. Okay? Don't let the user make errors. Okay? So then another thing is that when there's 2 important things with widgets: the name field and the value field. The name field, so remember last time I showed you those strings that get transmitted to the server with post and get? Those strings are formed from these name value fields. And remember, it was key equals value separated by what? An and sign, an ampersand. That's how you separate key value pairs. Okay, so the way it formed, or the way the browser figures out how to form those strings, with each widget, you typically give it a name and a value. Okay, that value isn't necessarily the same as what appears as the label. Okay? Most widgets are not labeled. You have to add a label outside of it. So if I just type a radio button, if I just say input, type equals radio, and I say name equals, say, topping, and I say value equals ham, and that's all I do, all I get is this round thing. I don't get ham. So you have to add a value field, not a value, you have to add an explicit label. So here I would have to say ham if I want it to see ham appear. Okay? So remember to label stuff. Remember that name and value are really important in your forms. Questions about widgets? Okay, let me, somewhere I cleverly put my notes for today and then forgot which of these fine places I put my notes. That's never good. And I know exactly where it is if I find it. It's hiding from me. There's an envelope. And you're saying Brad's looking through 5 envelopes, but there's a 6th envelope. Ah, here's the 6th envelope, and here are Brad's notes. Okay. Let's make sure. D. Okay. I will go over how to suppress the tabs next time because I always have to look it up. So don't worry too much about tabs right now. Other than that, it may not do what you expect with tabs. Now here it is doing the right thing, but it won't always do the right thing. In fact, I don't have a submit button here. So I am going to make this into a form and this into a form. And I'm going to have a submit button. Okay, and it's still working properly. Okay. Might be that action equals foo.php. See if that's going to do the trick. Okay, that called it. Okay, good. Here, actually, tabs are working properly, but sometimes they don't. Actually, I think Canvas is a good example of that. Let me go to Canvas for a moment. I'm not. At any rate, sometimes tabs don't work properly. So, actually, let's see if this works. Nope, that works too. Okay. Well, tabs are working properly here. I will come up with something that shows you how tabs sometimes fail. Okay. Questions about HTML forms. Let's move on to cascading style sheets, and there's just a few things that I want to talk about with cascading style sheets before letting you go to do your stuff. So the first thing is, with cascading style sheets, the idea is you use HTML to specify your content. you use cascading style sheets to specify all your formatting. So while you would use HTML to say that these things are in a list, you would use cascading style sheets to indicate what is the style of these little bullets, that these bullets right here are different than these bullets. You would use CSS to specify what is the color of a link, the fact that it's underlined, the fact here that I'm using boldface, the type of the font. Those kinds of things are specified using cascading style sheets. Here are the important things you need to remember with cascading style sheets. Okay, 1. So things about cascading style sheets, CSS. 1. They are good for horizontal layout. Or it is good. Should say it is good for horizontal layout. Horizontal. And bad for vertical layout. What do I mean by that? That means if I want to center things across the page, I can do it. If I want to center things so it appears in the middle of the page, good luck. The reason is it doesn't generally have a good feel for the size of the browser window. Basically, HTML is treated as a single infinite document. Therefore, it doesn't make much sense to cascading style sheets to say center something vertically because it's an infinite length page. It has a fixed width but an infinite height, so to speak. Therefore, it's very hard to get vertical layouts. If you want vertical layouts, you use a table essentially, because table cells allow you to do vertical layout. So that brings me to my second point, which a lot of designers cringe at, but over the years I have found is very good. If you want vertical layout, use a table. Okay, because you can, table cells can be vertically aligned. Okay, I have a lot of experience with laying stuff out, and I know that while you will read little tut-tut things about never use tables when you're doing layout, I find they work really well. So I use tables all the time to control my layouts. Feel free to use tables to control your layouts too. Okay, so what I find is that CSS is actually better for appearance. Tables are better for layout, for what it's worth. Okay, even though CSS technically is supposed to also be layout. Okay. Next thing, why do they call it cascading style sheets? It is because, why cascading? Okay, and the reason is if an HTML element does not have a style explicitly specified for a property, and let me change style to value, a value explicitly specified for a property, it inherits the value from its most immediate ancestor. Hence, it cascades down. So, for example, if you have a body and then you have a paragraph, and the body has a font family that is, say, Times Roman or Times New Roman, then if there is no font family specified for the paragraph tag will also be Times New Roman. So that is the meaning of the cascade you inherit from your parent. But there are ways to explicitly specify a style. So how to specify a style? There's three ways. So the highest priority is inline with the style attribute. Okay, you say style equals, and then you give properties. Next is at the top, you can use the style thing in the head statement. Okay, so anything inline trumps anything in the styles section, and then you can use style sheets. And the book tells you how to import them, so I'm not going to bother. And they are the lowest priority. So anything inline overrides anything in the style portion of the head statement of a document, and that in turn overrides anything in the style sheet. So that is the priority. Questions about that? As I said, I'm just hitting highlights that I think the book may have glossed over a little bit. Then we get to what are called selectors. So you can have them on an element, so you can have a selector that is like P. You can have what are classes, which start with a dot, like say dot foo. So if you have a element that says P class equals foo, then it would match this dot. Then there are IDs. So if you have this, so this is going to match something that's specifically that ID. So if you have H1 ID equals foo, the hashtag specifically matches something with that ID. ID attributes are supposed to be unique, should be unique to that element. Class attributes are not. So for example, you might have the first paragraph of every section being a class, so that you treat the first paragraph separately. So ID is an attribute that should be unique to an element. Class does not have to be. You're allowed to have multiple classes. If I have class equals foo space bar, then both the foo and the bar classes will apply. So you can have something be multiple classes. Yes?
So what would happen if you had like two different classes and they're like conflicting styles?
I don't know. I was just wondering that myself. Since I've never written a conflicting, I'm not sure how browsers resolve conflicts like that. So you have to be careful when you get into conflicts. There are generally complicated rules for resolving them. You try to avoid conflicts if you can. So The answer is I don't know. It may be browser dependent, in fact. Let's see. So those are the most common. You can also get descendants. So I could have something like, so children. I could say OLLI, and that would mean that any line item element that is a direct descendant of an ordered list should be styled this way. Now, if there was an intervening thing, if I had ordered list, P, and then LI, it wouldn't match because there's an intervening P. So it has to be a direct descendant. There's ways of saying, don't worry if it's a direct descendant. Those are less common. Usually it's direct descendants like this. So these are the most common. There's a whole bunch of other ones that were in the book. These are like, you remember the old 80-20 rule, 80 or 20% gets you 80%? This is more like 95-5 rule. 5% or 95-20. 20% gets you 95% of the uses, and the remaining 80% of the cases get the remaining 5%. These are the ones I would memorize because they come up all the time. Everything else, just look it up using Google. It's not worth it to memorize them. But these, the child, the element, the class, and the ID, they come up so frequently, they're worth memorizing the syntax for them. Okay? It's what I'll hold you responsible for on an exam. The other selectors are nice, but I wouldn't hold you responsible for them on an exam. You might find the other selectors, however, very helpful on your web projects. So if you're finding that it's hard to style something and you're thinking like, I need alternating bands, then go and look it up because there's ways to do it. There's odd even selectors, for example, that will, in a table, allow you to do one thing with the odd numbered bands or rows and something else with the even numbered rows. So generally, if you can think of how I want the first child or the first paragraph or the last paragraph, there's probably a selector for it. But these are the ones I care about. Okay? The other big thing with CSS that's worth remembering is that it uses a box model for layout. Okay, so the box model is really important. Okay, you have content, then you have padding, then you have a border, and then you have margin. And it's important that you memorize what the terms mean. So padding is what appears between the content and the border. It's typically white space. Then margin is what appears between another element and the border of this element. If you're going to, and you can specify width as things like percent. So you can say width equals 100%, and it will be the entire width of the browser window. You can say width equals 50%, it will be half the width of the browser window. Or you can say width equals so many pixels if you want it to be fixed. Does anyone know why they encourage you to use percentages for width rather than pixels? Because not all monitors have the same pixel resolution. Whereas width in percentage terms will always work. Okay, now I forget, and I didn't check this morning, I think with height you're only allowed to use pixels and you can't use percentages because document's considered infinite. So I believe with height your options are more restricted. I will check on that. But with width you can use either pixels or inches or centimeters, but you generally should use %.
Can't you use I don't remember what it is, but there's some sort of generic number that literally fits it to the size of your screen as like pixels?
I'm not 100%. That's what I want to check on.
E or something.
I know that as of a couple years ago, the answer, as far as I know, is still no. So I should go back and check. That's why I was saying try to use tables if you need that, because tables, I will go back and check. I know as of a couple years ago you still couldn't center on a page vertically. Okay, so this is important. Every element has this appearance. If you are having trouble with your layouts, put borders around them. Put like blue borders or red borders, because it will show you exactly how big the browser thinks this object is. Oftentimes your layouts are messed up and you think your content or the size of your element is X and the browser thinks it's Y. The way you debug it, you put borders around your elements. Okay? In fact, I will write that down because that should go in your notes. So when you're debugging layout, put borders around your elements. You will find that the widths and heights of the elements are often not what you think they are. That is, the browser thinks that those objects go way farther than you think they do, or way less. So I've found through experience, put borders around your elements. It's very easy to do. On the project, it says you need to have a left frame. So on the project, you'll remember that don't have it. Let me get it. You have this over here, okay? One way to get this is you could use a table, but you might not want to use a table with 2 columns. The other way you can do it is with the float property. So the book talks about it. I'm not going to talk about it, but just know, let's see, where did the book talk about it? That is helpful. GTD, basic selectors, common properties. There it is. Common properties, float and clear. So float, you can force an element to float to the left or right side of the browser window. So when you're trying to get these things that appear on the left or right side, the way you do it is with float. The CSS variable float the float property allows you to control that. Okay. Also, when you're trying to deal with things, the display property can tell, you can change whether something is called an inline element or a block element. Inline elements appear inline. So this float was produced with a TT or var tag, and it's inline. Paragraphs, or these line items, are block items because they appear on new new space vertically. So block elements appear vertically, inline are wrapped in effect horizontally. So if you want to think of it that way, inline is horizontal, block is vertical. And then you can hide items, which is helpful. You can change the display so that it's, I forget, I have to check, but you can change one property so that an element becomes visible or invisible. That is sometimes helpful. For example, when you see me save something, notice it says results successfully saved and then it goes away. That is an element where I'm changing the visibility property after it's on a timer, and after a certain amount of time the display property is changed to false and it disappears. So there's cool things you can do with CSS. Questions? Okay, final thing. And then I will let you all work on your stuff. So how, on the midterm solutions, how did I manage to get things like the and symbol, the there exists symbol, or the pi symbol in HTML? I did it through using something called entity codes. So here is pi. If you do ampersand, that starts an entity code, then the name of the entity code, then a semicolon. That will get you special characters. Okay, you'll notice join doesn't have a special name. It just has a number associated with it. You can Google these entity codes. So that's in fact what I did. I simply Googled HTML join character, and you get the entity codes for them. So there was nothing that actually said ampersand join. But an entity code is an entity, then a name, and then a semicolon. Now, here's something that will get you. I want to say A less than 10. That worked. A less than 10 or B greater than 20. Yeah, that worked too. That's not what I want. Okay. Let's do the thing that always fails. # include standard io.h. We're missing standard io.h. What has happened? Well, what has happened is HTML thinks this is a tag. Okay, so if I want them to show up, I have to use entity codes. In this case, less than is LT, greater than is GT. And you put semicolons after it to show when it is terminated. So now if I display it, it works properly. So you have to be very careful with less than and greater than signs because sometimes they appear to eat content. And the reason they sometimes appear to eat content is they can make content look like tags. And if the browser can't interpret it as a tag, it assumes it's an error. And it just doesn't display your content. Okay? So you may have to use entity codes at times too, or for special characters. Okay, with that, I'm going to turn you loose. I'm going to set up a little attendance quiz for the end of class. What I want you to do is complete the challenge assignments for today. Feel free to work with a friend on that. If you get it done, try to work on the web homework because I'm here to answer questions. So, and please do work. If you start pulling out your cell phones, you're going to piss me off. So don't do it. Try to do some work. And I'll be around in a minute after I get this quiz set up.
So he just starts his migrating allocations from the start of the assignment. So I have to figure out how to keep order that.
Just give me 1 second, okay? I want to get these quizzes set up.
I'm assuming once we get supervisor selections, like the Patreon allocators and everything. If that's the case, then I just use Patreon allocations for all my permissions. And as soon as we go to main, then you turn on the setting of the Patreon allocator. But we need to make sure that so then we almost need to just like we just need to keep like a frequency just have each page have a small set of bookkeeping bits. So it's like taking go ahead and do the process stuff without having
Okay. So,
Sorry, just a quick question. Sorry,
Mhm.
but
No worries.
I looked online at that. I was at ESC over the weekend, and I know you said that I was good to not be here, but that grade said missing.
okay, send me email.
Send you an email.
Yeah, because actually I knew, but I forgot what your last name was.
That's fine. Yeah, I'll
I
send
think
you
it's
an email.
Mar10, isn't it?
It's beyond.
See, that's
Yeah,
why I
that's
don't
totally good.
try to. That's why I don't try to guess.
I should have written something down and been like, yeah, you know, if it's a conflict or whatever, it's not.
Well, that's what I ask you. Actually, now I've learned. Just send me something because that way I can give you credit.
I'll try to send something this week about that, and I'll make sure to put my name.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.